She followed her alpha mate to the council meeting and found him in another Omega's bed instead. Lyra moved quietly through the cold stone corridors of the Moonstone Kingdom. The castle walls were old, carved with intricate patterns of dragons, wolves, and the crescent moon, the symbols of the kingdom's long and complicated history. Every step she took echoed softly, a whisper against the distant murmurs of the council chambers. Tonight she had followed Kale, her alpha mate, her bond, because she could not bear the thought of him slipping from her sight. But her heart felt heavier than ever. Something had changed, though she could not name it. Something dark stirred behind his calm, commanding presence, and the unease she carried had grown like a shadow in the corners of her mind. Kale was unlike any other. Strong, proud, and dangerous, he commanded respect with a single glance. Even the kings and queens of neighboring realms listened when he spoke. But it was not only his power that drew her to him. It was the pull she could not resist, a bond deeper than words, older than the centuries that shaped the Moonstone Kingdom. She had always known that being tied to him would not be simple, but she had believed that their bond was unshakable, that nothing could come between them. Tonight, that belief would tremble. She paused at a carved archway, peering silently into the candle-lit hall where the council had gathered. Lords and ladies murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of politeness and tension. Political power always carried a weight heavier than any sword, and Lyra had seen it in Kale's eyes before, though he rarely let the strain show. Tonight, she realized he seemed different, distant in a way that made her chest ache. The air in the hall was heavy with incense and whispered schemes, and she felt a sudden sharp pang of fear, though she did not yet understand why. Kale was there, seated at the high table, his posture regal, yet a shadow of something unspoken lingered over him. His gaze moved over the council members, calculating, alert, but when their eyes met briefly across the room, Lyra noticed a flicker of hesitation, a secret he was holding close. Her heart tightened. She wanted to step forward to call his name, to remind him that she was here, that she belonged with him. But instead, she stayed hidden, watching and waiting. Something in her told her that tonight would not unfold like any other. The council's discussion was a quiet storm of politics, strategy, and threats veiled as advice. Words about alliances, taxation, and border disputes filled the room, but beneath the surface, the currents of treachery ran deep. Lyra listened, her mind sharp, sensing the tension in every gesture, every tone. She realized that Kale was not only fighting for his crown, but for his very soul, balancing the needs of the kingdom against forces she could not yet see. And yet, even as she admired him, a pang of jealousy stung her heart. There was someone else here tonight who seemed to pull at him with invisible threads. After what felt like hours, the council finally broke. Lords and ladies rose, some in satisfaction, some in quiet frustration. Lyra waited, her pulse quickening, hoping for a moment alone with Kale. She had to understand the distance she felt between them, had to feel the strength of their bond, even in a world that seemed determined to test it. But when she followed him through the twisting hallways, she came to a private chamber and froze. Through the slightly open door she saw him. Kale, not alone, not with her. Selene was there. Selene, the other Omega who had always held a quiet power of her own, her presence subtle but undeniable. She leaned close to Kale, whispering something that made his shoulders tense, his head bow slightly. And then, to Lyra's horror, he reached toward her, not in anger or command, but with something softer, something intimate that tore through Lyra's heart like a blade. Lyra stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. She had imagined many scenarios, feared betrayal, feared that perhaps her bond with Kale could be challenged. But seeing them there, their closeness, the quiet way he let her touch him, was a pain unlike any she had known. Her knees weakened, her stomach turned. She had followed him, had trusted him, had believed in their unbreakable connection. And yet here, in this quiet chamber, he seemed to belong somewhere else, with someone else. But even in her shock, something in her mind did not fully believe the scene. There was an energy around Selene, a magic she could feel even from outside the room. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat that wasn't entirely Kale's. Lyra's instincts screamed at her that there was more here than simple desire, more than betrayal in the human sense. Something supernatural, something ancient, linked Selene and Kale. And if that were true, it might explain the unease she had felt for weeks. Her feet carried her away before her heart could stop her. She ran silently to the moonlit courtyard, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced with confusion, pain, and the unbearable ache of longing. She had to understand, had to find answers, yet she felt paralyzed by the images she had seen. Her bond with Kale pulled at her, stronger than ever, even in this moment of despair. It was a tug at her soul that neither time nor distance could weaken. Lyra sank to a marble bench beneath the silver light of the moon. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers and the faint, distant smoke of the council's torches. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering not from cold but from the storm raging inside her. The connection to Kale burned in her veins, a mixture of love, desire, fear, and anger. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but a voice in her mind warned her to wait, to understand before she acted. That voice was the quiet, ancient part of her that had always been sensitive to the magic in the world, to the subtle movements of destiny. As she sat, trying to steady herself, Lyra noticed something strange. The shadows beneath the courtyard's archways began to move unnaturally, curling like smoke and whispering words she could almost hear but not fully understand. Her magic, latent and uncontrolled, stirred. She had always felt its faint presence, a whisper at the edges of her consciousness, but tonight it flared like a spark to a dry forest. It whispered Kale's name, soft and haunting, and for a moment she felt as though the night itself mourned and longed alongside her. She realized then that what she had seen in Kale's chamber was not the full story. There was something binding him to Selene, something beyond mere human desire. Her heart, still aching, burned with determination. She would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost her. And yet, even as she made this decision, the bond between them pulsed with undeniable strength, reminding her that no matter how far he seemed, no matter what magic or shadow might interfere, Kale belonged to her in ways that could not be broken easily. Hours passed as Lyra sat under the moonlight, wrestling with grief and suspicion, with fear and hope tangled together like threads of silver and shadow. The wind carried a distant cry, perhaps a bird, perhaps something else, a sound that made her pulse quicken and her hair rise. She felt as though the kingdom itself was alive, watching, waiting. And in that quiet, trembling stillness, she swore she would confront whatever dark magic sought to claim her alpha, her bond, and her heart. But fate had more to reveal before she could act. A soft rustle in the shadows made her turn sharply, hand to the hilt of the small dagger she always carried, not for violence, but for protection. Nothing emerged, only the whispering wind that seemed to carry laughter and tears at the same time. Lyra realized that the magic awakening in her was responding not just to Kale's presence or Selene's influence, but to the very heartbeat of the kingdom itself. The threads of destiny were pulling tight, drawing her and Kale into a story older than the castle stones, older than the Moonstone Kingdom's crown. Her thoughts returned again to Kale, to the moment she had glimpsed him in Selene's arms. Anger rose within her, sharp and bitter, but beneath it lay a deeper, more painful truth. She loved him. Not just for his strength, nor his command over armies and councils, but for the man beneath it all, the man who had chosen her once, and who could, she hoped, choose her again. The ache of jealousy twisted inside her like a knife, yet it could not extinguish the longing, the burning desire to reach him, to hold him, to remind him that their bond was more than any magic, any curse, any prophecy. Night deepened and Lyra finally rose, her resolve hardening like stone. She would not flee. She would not surrender. She would follow Cale again, speak to him, and uncover the truth of whatever dark power bound him. And in that quiet resolve, a faint light flickered in the darkness, a promise that love, even when tested by shadows, could endure, could fight, could transform. But as she turned to leave the courtyard, the wind carried a soft, chilling whisper that made her pause. It was not Cale's voice, not Selene's, but something older than the castle itself. A curse, perhaps, or a shadow of the kingdom's ancient magic, stirring awake as if sensing her determination. She felt it coil around her heart and soul, a reminder that nothing in Moonstone Kingdom was ever simple, and that the night held secrets far deeper and more dangerous than she could imagine. And for the first time, Lyra understood. Following her alpha mate tonight had brought her not just heartbreak, but into the very center of a storm she could not yet see, a story that would demand courage, sacrifice, and a love stronger than even the shadows themselves. With a final glance at the moonlit castle, Lyra whispered Cale's name, a prayer and a vow combined. The journey had begun, and there would be no turning back. Lyra returned to her chambers with her mind spinning like the storm clouds gathering over the Moonstone Kingdom. Every step through the castle felt heavy, as if the stones themselves whispered secrets she could almost hear. Her chest burned with a mixture of jealousy, fear, and longing. Cale, her alpha mate, the one whose heartbeat was stitched into her soul, was entangled with Selene. And yet a part of her could feel that something deeper, something unnatural was at work. The bond she shared with Cale was no ordinary love. It was tied to destiny, to the magic of the kingdom itself. And now that magic was stirring. She sat by her window, the moonlight spilling over her face and the cool night air brushing against her skin. She closed her eyes, trying to calm the ache in her chest, but it was no use. She could feel Cale even from this distance, an invisible thread, taut and vibrating, connecting them. It was as if the night itself had pulled him close, whispering his presence into her very veins. She shivered and clenched her hands, trying to make sense of the impossible mixture of longing and dread that filled her. Her thoughts kept returning to Selene. That Omega was dangerous, yes, but not merely because of ambition or desire. Lyra sensed an ancient power in her, something dark and hypnotic. When Cale's hand had reached for Selene, it had not been entirely by choice. Magic had been at play, old and cunning, weaving invisible threads around him and bending him in ways Lyra could feel even from outside the chamber. The thought made her heart pound, not only from fear for her bond but from the rising certainty that their lives were about to be changed forever. Lyra's own magic stirred at the edges of her consciousness. It had always been quiet, a soft hum beneath her awareness. But tonight, after seeing Cale and Selene, it flared like a spark to tinder. Her emotions, raw and unguarded, fueled it, and suddenly she felt a strange warmth coil through her chest, down her arms and into her hands. It was as if her very being was responding to the pull of destiny, to the call of the curse that had begun to awaken around Cale. The thought terrified her and yet made her pulse quicken. She was not powerless, not entirely. Perhaps she could influence the outcome, but only if she acted carefully, only if she understood what she was facing. By dawn, Lyra could no longer sleep. She dressed quickly, pulling her cloak tight and moving silently through the castle, following whispers of magic that seemed to guide her steps. The corridors were empty, but the walls felt alive. Shadows clung to the corners like living creatures, and the faint glow of enchantments hidden within the stone pulsed softly under her fingertips as she brushed past. She could feel the threads of the curse tightening around Cale, pulling him in directions she did not understand. Her heart ached with the knowledge that each step she took without him was a step further into a danger they might not survive together. In the castle's library, Lyra pored over the ancient scrolls and tomes she had kept secret from everyone, even Kale. Her fingers traced the faded letters of prophecies and magical bindings, seeking a clue, an answer, any knowledge that could help her. The candlelight flickered and shadows danced across the pages as she read words that spoke of bonds, curses, and sacrifices. She realized the truth slowly, the terrible weight of it pressing against her heart. The magic binding Kale and Selene was not natural, not of human making. It was a curse older than the kingdom, a spell meant to entangle desire and power together until it consumed one and spared the other. Her stomach twisted at the thought. Could it be true that Selene had been chosen by magic to interfere with Kale's heart? That the very pulse of the kingdom had decided to test their love in such a cruel, relentless way? Lyra's mind refused to accept it at first, but the evidence was undeniable. The threads she felt connecting Kale to her were real, and the threads connecting him to Selene were equally real, but darker, tangled with the unnatural pulse of an ancient curse. The question that burned in her mind was terrifying. Could love survive when fate itself seemed determined to separate them? Lyra knew she could not wait passively. She could feel the pull of her own magic, raw and unstable, urging her to act. The risk was immense. She was not yet fully trained, and the power she carried could harm Kale as easily as it could protect him. But she could not ignore the call. She gathered her courage, wrapping her cloak tightly around herself, and made her way to the castle's hidden sanctuary, a place few had seen, where the magic of the kingdom had been strongest through the ages. The sanctuary was a circular chamber deep below the castle, its walls carved with ancient runes that glimmered faintly in the dim light. At the center, a shallow pool reflected the flickering torches, and the pale light of the moon filtering through a small skylight above. Lyra knelt at the edge of the pool, placing her hands in the water, and allowed herself to feel the threads of magic that connected her to Kale. They were strong, a bond that no curse could entirely sever, yet the shadow of Selene's influence loomed over him, twisting the threads and creating knots of confusion and pain. Lyra closed her eyes and reached deep into herself, letting her magic rise. She focused on the bond she shared with Kale, on the memories of their first touch, the first moment their fates intertwined. The water in the pool shimmered as her power responded, rippling outward in waves that carried whispers of her love and longing. She felt Kale's presence more vividly than ever, his pulse echoing hers across the distance, but now she could also sense the shadows, the darkness of the curse pressing against him, twisting his thoughts and desires. As she concentrated, a vision came to her, sudden and sharp. Kale was standing in the council hall again, but the light around him flickered and darkened. Selene's form appeared beside him, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light, her hands moving as if casting a spell he could not resist. Lyra gasped and stumbled back, the image fading, but the weight of it remained. The curse was active. It was not merely temptation or jealousy. It was a magic force, powerful and insidious, designed to challenge their bond and test their hearts. Lyra's mind raced. She could confront Selene directly, but she knew it would be dangerous. The Omega's power was real, and the council members were not to be trusted. Everyone in the castle had their own ambitions, and alliances shifted like sand in the wind. Lyra realized she would need allies, but she could trust almost no one. The bond she shared with Kale was the only certainty, the only true strength she had. And yet, even that strength felt fragile against the weight of the curse and the forces gathering around them. Determined, Lyra decided to seek guidance from the exiled Seer of Shadows, a wise Omega who had been cast out of the castle many years ago. The seer was known for seeing the threads of fate clearly, for speaking truths wrapped in riddles, and for understanding magic deeper than anyone else in the kingdom. Lyra had never visited the seer before, but she knew that to save Kale, to protect their bond, she must take the risk. She gathered a small bag with provisions and set out through the secret tunnels leading beyond the castle walls, moving swiftly and silently in the dim dawn light. The journey was treacherous. The tunnels twisted beneath the mountain, lined with ancient stones that hummed faintly with magic. Shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, curling around her legs and whispering indistinctly. Lyra pressed on, focusing on her goal, calling Kale's name silently in her mind as if the thought alone could guide her. The threads connecting them pulsed faintly, a reminder that love, even strained and tested, could be a guiding light in the darkest places. Finally, after what felt like hours, she reached the clearing where the seer's dwelling stood. It was a small, circular hut made of intertwined branches and stone, glowing faintly with enchantments that protected it from the eyes of the unworthy. The air smelled of herbs, old parchment, and something ancient, like the breath of centuries long past. Lyra knocked softly, and the door opened before she could speak. The seer regarded her with eyes that seemed to pierce straight into her soul. "I have been waiting," the seer said softly, voice like wind through dead leaves. "You carry a storm inside you. The threads of fate twist violently, and the one you love is trapped in a web older than the kingdom itself." Lyra's heart thudded painfully. "Kale, he is in danger," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw him with Selene. There is something wrong, something unnatural. The bond, the curse, I don't know how to save him." The seer nodded slowly. "The curse is strong. It feeds on desire, on fear, on jealousy. But love that is true, that is unselfish, can cut through it. You must face the darkness, Lyra, and embrace the strength you have hidden from even yourself. Only then will the threads untangle, and only then can Kale be free." Lyra felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. She had always known that love with Kale would not be easy, that destiny would test them. But she had not realized how deeply those tests would wound her heart, or how much courage she would need to face them. She clenched her fists, feeling the surge of magic and determination rise within her. She would not fail. She could not. Kale's life, their bond, and the kingdom itself depended on her strength and resolve. As she turned to leave the seer's dwelling, a chilling wind swept through the clearing. It whispered Kale's name in tones both tender and cruel, carrying with it a promise of trials yet to come. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She knew that the next steps would be the hardest of all, that the curse would fight her with every ounce of power, and that her love alone would not be enough unless she embraced the magic within herself fully. And so, under the pale light of dawn, Lyra set her face toward the castle, toward the chambers where Kale's fate and her own would be decided. Every step carried the weight of her heart, the pulse of her magic, and the knowledge that the night was only the beginning. The shadows of the curse moved unseen, waiting, but Lyra was no longer afraid. She would fight. She would endure, and she would reclaim the bond that was hers by destiny, by love, and by courage. The wind whispered again, colder and sharper this time, as though warning her of the storm ahead. Lyra's fingers tingled with magic, her heart pulsed with desire and fear, and her eyes burned with determination. The threads of fate were tightening, the curse stirring with awareness, and Kale's life was in peril. But she would face it all, every shadow, every betrayal, every impossible trial. For love, she realized, was not gentle. It was fire and shadow, desire and sacrifice, danger and hope intertwined. And Lyra would walk into that fire, into the shadow, and emerge ready to reclaim the one who was hers in heart, soul, and destiny. Lyra returned to the castle with the first hints of dusk brushing the sky, painting the stone walls in shades of amber and violet. The corridors seemed quieter than usual, but she could feel the pulse of the castle, the secret stirrings of the council, and the invisible threads of magic weaving around Kale. Her heart ached with longing, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She had gained knowledge from the Seer of Shadows, and now she would act. She would find Kale, and she would confront the curse that bound him, no matter the danger. The castle felt different tonight. Shadows lingered longer, twisting across the walls like living fingers. Whispers seemed to drift from hidden chambers, faint murmurs of plotting and magic. Lyra moved cautiously, her senses alert. Each step brought a surge of anticipation and fear. Kale was near, she could feel it, but so was the danger. Seleni's presence in the castle had grown stronger over the past hours, her influence over the council subtle but unmistakable. Every glance exchanged between nobles carried hidden meaning, and Lyra realized that the bonds of power in the Moonstone Kingdom were as complex as the threads of magic tugging at her alpha mate. She found him in the council chamber, though it was empty of the other nobles. Kale stood in the center, tense, his jaw set, his hands clenched at his sides. Shadows clung to him, dark and restless, as if the curse itself had made a home around him. His eyes flickered with pain, and for a moment Lyra hesitated. Seeing him like this, so strong yet so vulnerable, stirred a mixture of fear, desire, and determination within her. She could not let him be taken by this darkness. "Kale," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silent room. He turned at once, his gaze locking with hers. The bond between them flared, a visible pulse of magic, bright and dangerous. "Lyra," he breathed, as if her name alone could calm the storm raging within him. "Don't speak yet," Lyra said firmly. "Not until I understand. Not until I know how to break this curse that binds you." Her voice carried a steadiness she did not fully feel. She had trained herself to control her magic, to focus it, but the energy thrumming through her body tonight was unlike anything she had felt before. It was wild, untamed, and it called for action. Kale's eyes darkened, conflicted. I cannot control it," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Selene, I don't want to, but the threads pull me." The words cut through Lyra's heart, sharp and bitter, but beneath them lay a deeper truth. The bond, though strained, was still there, and she could feel it reaching for her, calling her closer. "You are not powerless," Lyra said, stepping forward. Her hands glowed faintly as she focused her magic on the bond. "I can help you. We can fight it together." She reached out, letting the threads of their connection flow into her hands, weaving them with her own magic. The room shimmered faintly, and Kale's body trembled as the darkness resisting him recoiled at her touch. But the curse was clever and insidious. It twisted his desires, filling him with confusion and fear, drawing on every insecurity he held. Selene's influence was still present, whispering promises and shadows into his mind. Lyra knew that confronting the curse required more than magic. It required trust, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice. "Lyra, I fear that if I resist, I may lose myself," Kale said, his voice strained, almost pleading. "And if I lose myself, I may never return." The fear in his eyes ignited something fierce in Lyra. She had seen him as unyielding, untouchable, but this glimpse of vulnerability made her love him even more, even as it filled her with despair. "We will not let that happen," she said firmly. "I will not let you fall. Not to this curse, not to anyone, not even to yourself." Her words carried power, both magical and emotional, a tether strong enough to reach across the shadows that had ensnared him. She extended her hands toward him, the glow of her magic spreading like a river of light. The moment she touched him, the room shook. The curse reacted violently, a force of dark energy that surged from Kale, swirling around them both like a storm. Lyra held her ground, feeling every pulse of magic, every whisper of shadow. She could feel Selene's presence, faint but persistent, trying to pull Kale away, trying to twist his will. The struggle was immense, but Lyra clung to him, pouring every ounce of her strength, her love, and her determination into the bond they shared. Kale's body stiffened and he cried out, the sound filled with both pain and longing. Lyra did not falter. She whispered his name again and again, letting the sound carry the weight of her promise, the certainty of her devotion. Slowly the shadows began to loosen. the knot of the curse unraveling just enough for Kale to breathe without the suffocating weight pressing down on him. But even as relief washed over them, a new danger emerged. From the shadows at the edge of the room, Selene stepped forward. Her eyes glowed faintly with unnatural light, and her smile was both beautiful and terrifying. "You cannot undo what has already begun," she said softly, her voice like silk wrapped in steel. "The threads were always meant to test him, to test you. The bond alone is not enough." Lyra's hands clenched, her magic flaring in response to Selene's presence. "You will not control him," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "You have no power over what he truly feels, over what we share. Leave us, or I will force you to." Her words carried the edge of command, and the bond between her and Kale pulsed in response, bright and defiant. Selene's smile widened, and for a moment her form seemed to shimmer and distort, as if she were more spirit than flesh. "You think you can fight fate. You think love alone is enough to defy the threads woven by ancient magic." She stepped closer, and the air grew colder, heavy with a sense of ancient power. "You underestimate what this kingdom has endured, what it has demanded of those who dare to love." Kale's hand reached for Lyra, trembling slightly, and she grasped it firmly. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "I love you, Kale." That is enough. The magic of her words, of her unwavering emotion, surged outward, breaking through the lingering tendrils of the curse. Selene recoiled, hissing softly, her power faltering in the face of such raw, unyielding love. But Selene was not defeated. With a flick of her hand, she summoned a wave of shadow that swept toward them, a storm of darkness that seemed intent on consuming everything in its path. Lyra braced herself, holding onto Kale, letting their bond strengthen her resolve. Together, they withstood the force, letting their connection form a barrier of light and trust. The shadows met their magic and dissipated, but Selene vanished before Lyra could reach her, leaving behind a lingering sense of threat and unfinished danger. Kale collapsed into Lyra's arms, trembling from the effort, his eyes dark with exhaustion and relief. Lyra held him close, her hands running through his hair, her heart pounding with a mixture of love, fear, and triumph. "You are safe for now," she whispered. "I will not let anything take you from me." He looked at her, his expression raw and unguarded, and for the first time in weeks, the tension between them seemed to ease, if only slightly. "Lyra, I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that the curse would claim me, that I would betray you, that I would lose myself completely." His voice broke, and Lyra's heart ached at the sight of his vulnerability. "You are not alone," she said softly, pressing her forehead to his. "We face this together. Always." The words carried more than comfort. They were a vow, a promise, and a challenge to the darkness that still lingered in the corners of the castle. Even as they embraced, the magic around them shifted. Lyra could feel the remnants of the curse, the threads that had tested them both, still moving, still watching. She knew the battle was not over, that Selene would return, and that the council's ambitions could still threaten everything they held dear. But in this moment, they had reclaimed each other, and that was enough to give them strength for the trials yet to come. They left the chamber together, moving silently through the castle as dusk deepened into night. The corridors seemed less oppressive now, but Lyra could feel the pulse of danger, the lingering threads of magic that still tugged at Kale. She knew that the next steps would be the hardest, that Selene's schemes and the council's plots would test them in ways they had not yet imagined. But they would face it together, and that knowledge gave her courage. As they reached the balcony overlooking the castle grounds, the moonlight fell on their faces, silver and soft. Lyra looked at Kale, her eyes full of determination and love. "We are not finished," she said softly, though her voice carried strength. "The curse will not win. And whatever Selene plans next, we will face it." Kale nodded, his eyes dark with resolve, and for the first time he smiled, not a mask of control but a true, human expression of hope and trust. "With you," he said, "I can face anything." But even as they held each other beneath the moon, Lyra felt it, a whisper of shadow at the edge of the balcony, a presence watching, waiting, patient and cunning. The danger was far from over. The threads of fate still tightened, and the kingdom's secrets were far deeper and darker than either of them had imagined. A chill ran down her spine, and she tightened her grip on Kale. The battle for his soul, for their love, and for the kingdom itself was only beginning. The Moonstone Kingdom lay quiet under the heavy shadows of night, the air thick with anticipation. Even the stars seemed to hold their breath, watching the fate of Kale and Lyra as it balanced on a knife's edge. The castle corridors, usually alive with murmurs and movement, were empty tonight, save for the echo of their footsteps. Lyra's heart beat like a drum in her chest, equal parts fear, hope, and determination. Tonight, she knew, the final trial awaited them. Selene had not shown herself, but her presence lingered like a cold mist through the castle. Her influence had not diminished, and the threads of the curse she had woven around Kale still pulsed faintly, stubborn and insidious. Lyra could feel them tugging, whispering half-truths and shadows into his mind. But she had grown stronger since their first encounter. The lessons from the Seer of Shadows had guided her, and the magic within her, once quiet and timid, now blazed with purpose. She would face the darkness and claim Kale's soul, their love and their future. Kale followed her silently, his expression tense, the weight of the curse still evident in his posture. Even freed partially from Selene's immediate influence, he carried the residue of her power, a lingering shadow that made his usual calm presence brittle. Lyra reached out and took his hand, letting their bond flow between them like fire, reinforcing him with strength and reassurance. "Are you ready?" she whispered, her eyes searching his. Kale nodded, his jaw tight but his eyes steady. "I am. With you, I am ready." They entered the heart of the castle, the grand hall, where the council had gathered days before. The chamber was immense, lined with towering columns and tapestries depicting past kings and queens, some victorious, some fallen. Tonight, the hall seemed to hold its own breath, shadows flickering under the torchlight like creatures of their own will. The magic of the castle hummed around them, as if aware of the confrontation about to unfold. Selene appeared at the far end of the hall, stepping forward from the shadows with a grace that was both elegant and menacing. Her eyes glimmered with that unnatural light, her smile a mixture of triumph and cruelty. "So the Omega who claims the heart of the Alpha dares to face me," she said softly, her voice smooth and precise, carrying through the hall like a melody tinged with danger. "You have courage, I will give you that. But courage alone is not enough to defeat the threads of fate." Lyra's hands glowed with magical energy, and Kale stood beside her, the threads of their bond visible now as a shimmering golden light that pulsed and wrapped around both of them. Together, they were stronger, a single force against Selene's shadowy influence. "This ends tonight," Lyra said, her voice unwavering. "Whatever power you think you hold over him, over us, it is nothing compared to the truth of our bond." Selene's smile faltered slightly. She raised her hands, summoning tendrils of shadow that swirled like smoke, reaching for Kale with a force that could tear him apart. But Lyra met it immediately, pushing her own magic forward, the golden threads of their love acting as a shield. The shadows collided with the light, hissing and recoiling, a fierce battle of energy filling the chamber with crackling sparks and winds of magic. Kale took a step forward, his own strength returning as Lyra's magic strengthened him. The curse fought against him, tugging at his mind, whispering lies, twisting his feelings, but he anchored himself to her, to the bond they shared. Every step he took was a struggle, but with Lyra beside him, he could resist. Together their magic intertwined, forming a shield of golden brilliance that pulsed with every heartbeat, a living proof of love and determination. Selene's voice rose, sharp and furious. "You cannot win. This is destiny." The threads were woven long before either of you were born. The bond is weak compared to what I hold." Lyra did not falter. "You underestimate love," she said simply. "It is stronger than any curse, any prophecy, any shadow." She stepped forward, letting the threads of their bond shine brighter, wrapping around Selene like a living force. The darkness shrieked, twisting and trying to resist, but the warmth of their connection, their shared courage, was impossible to break. Selene faltered, her shadows retracting for a moment as the force of true, unyielding love pressed against her. She tried again, stronger, her magic like a storm of midnight winds, but the threads around Kale pulsed and flared, stronger with each heartbeat. Kale's hands clenched, and he finally spoke aloud, his voice firm and commanding. "I am not yours to control. My heart is mine to choose, and it has chosen Lyra." At his declaration, the shadows shrieked and faltered, and Selene stumbled backward, her power weakening. Lyra's golden threads coiled tighter, a gentle but irresistible force. "You cannot touch him," Lyra said, her voice ringing with clarity. "You cannot harm him. Love is not something to take, it is something we share freely, and it is stronger than your darkness." Selene's form flickered, as if she were dissolving into the shadows themselves. "This is not over," she hissed, a promise and a threat in one breath. The threads will never forget, and neither will he." But before Selene could strike again, a brilliant surge of light erupted from Kale, joining the threads of their bond into a radiant shield that shattered the remaining shadows completely. Selene screamed, her form scattering like smoke caught in the wind, leaving the hall empty and quiet, save for the glow of their magic intertwining. Lyra collapsed to her knees, tears running down her face, the relief almost overwhelming. Kale knelt beside her, wrapping her in his arms, their breaths mingling. "It's over," he whispered, though even he trembled from the effort and the intensity of what had just occurred. We survived." Lyra clung to him, her heart still racing. "We did. We are together. And nothing can take that from us." The threads of their bond shimmered faintly around them, now calm and steady, a permanent mark of the love and courage that had broken the curse. As they stood together, the chamber seemed to sigh, the oppressive shadows lifting, as if the castle itself recognized the strength of their love. The Moonstone Kingdom, long plagued by whispers of treachery and ancient magic, now felt lighter, safer, touched by the triumph of courage and devotion. In the days that followed, the council watched in awe and respect as Kale and Lyra returned to their duties, their bond stronger than ever, their presence commanding yet tender. Nobles whispered of the courage of the Omega, who had faced the darkness, and of the Alpha, who had resisted the temptations of shadow and desire. The kingdom itself seemed to recognize the change, its magical currents flowing in harmony rather than tension, a reflection of the union that had conquered the greatest threat they had ever known. Kale often found Lyra in quiet corners of the castle, and in those moments their hands would meet, fingers intertwining, hearts speaking in a silent language only they could understand. Every glance, every touch was a reminder of what they had endured and of the love that had survived the test of curses, ambition, and shadows. Lyra, once unsure of her strength, now moved with the confidence of someone who had faced fear and emerged victorious. Her magic, once hesitant and quiet, now flowed steadily, a symbol of her courage, her choices, and her love. She had claimed her place not only beside Kale but in the history of the Moonstone Kingdom, as someone who had reshaped fate itself. Kale, too, had changed. The ordeal had tempered him, softened the rigid edges of command, and deepened his understanding of trust and vulnerability. He learned that power alone was not enough. Love, courage, and partnership were equally vital, and in Lyra he had found all of that and more. One night, under the soft glow of the moon, Kale and Lyra stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying the scent of blooming night flowers and the faint, distant hum of magic still alive in the stones beneath their feet. They held each other close, feeling the pulse of the bond they had fought to protect, the threads of their love glowing softly like embers of a fire that would never go out. "We made it," Kale whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Lyra's face. "Through everything we made it." Lyra smiled, her heart full. "Yes, and we will face whatever comes next together, always." For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the kingdom below, knowing that trials would come as they always did, but also knowing that they would meet them side by side. The curse had been broken, the shadows dispelled, and their love had been tested and strengthened beyond measure. They had claimed not only each other but a destiny they would shape together, a story of courage, devotion, and transformation that would echo through the Moonstone Kingdom for generations to come. And as the first light of dawn touched the towers, painting the stones in shades of gold and rose, Kale and Lyra pressed their foreheads together, feeling the pulse of their hearts in unison. The night had passed, the darkness defeated, and yet the memory of trials, of longing, of courage would remain, an eternal testament to the bond they shared. In that quiet, sacred moment, Lyra knew that the story was far from over. Life, magic, and destiny would continue to test them, challenge them, and shape them. But no shadow, no curse, no ambition could sever the golden threads they had woven together. Love, sacrifice, and courage had triumphed, and from that night on, the Moonstone Kingdom would remember that bond forever. And for Lyra and Kale, that bond was the beginning of a legend that would shine brighter than any darkness could ever touch.